Hey, good afternoon. Welcome back to my channel here. Today I'm going to be talking about drug inserts and prescribing information. What is that? Those are those little sheets of paper that you see inside every prescription medication. It tells you everything that you need to know about a particular drug, right? This should be very useful if you're a health sciences student, whether you're going into pre-medicine or pre-dentistry, pre-pharmacy, nursing school, what have you. Hopefully you'll become familiar with these throughout your career, and it's very useful information. So today I'm going to walk you through one example of this. I'm going to walk you through an example of Synthroid, or levothyroxine sodium. That is a commonly prescribed thyroid hormone replacement treatment. And so we're going to kind of walk through how to actually read these things, because they're actually pretty detailed and they have a lot of information in them. First of all, it's important to understand that the prescribing information is written for healthcare professionals. It's not really written for lay people. Now, it is available to everyone, but it outlines exactly how to use that medication, including its usage, dosage, side effects, as well as any special warnings that you need to take into account for the benefit of the patient. So in this case, if we look at Synthroid, that's the brand name of the drug. That the chemical name is levothyroxine sodium. And so if you go to, if you just open up a web browser, and you could actually do a Google search for Synthroid. I've actually already done that here, and I went to the synthroid.com website. That's the manufacturer's information. And of course, this is generally an advertisement. They've got a lot of ad stuff on here, very important. But at the very top, you'll see the full prescribing information. They have that here for English and Spanish, right? So you can click right on here and open up the prescribing information for Synthroid right off the bat right there. I'm going to do a little zooming in, and then we can see now the first page is basically the highlights of the prescribing information. So this is a brief summary. And so what you see here is you'll see the name, you'll see the brand name with a registered trademark. You also see the chemical name in parentheses. You'll see that it's available as tablets and for oral use only. It was initially approved in 2002. The big black box warning is this is particularly noted, and they want you to be aware that this should not be used as a treatment for obesity or weight loss. So that's actually pretty important to take into account there. And then they also have another warning about doses beyond the range of daily hormonal requirements may produce serious or even life-threatening manifestations of toxicity. So that should be especially noted by the healthcare professional. The other thing you see, of course, if there's any recent or major changes, they'll be noted here. We also see indications and usage. Now, what is meant by indications, right? Well, what a drug is indicated for is the major disease state that it is to be used for, and that's what it's actually been approved by the Federal Food and Drug Administration for, right? There may be secondary uses, but they should also be listed in the indications. Now, in the summary, you're going to see the major ones here, and then, of course, the actual document, this is pretty long. It's 20 pages long, right? So that's why it's really important to kind of see some of the summaries here. So in summary, the indication usage, this is for hypothyroidism, and it's a replacement therapy in primary thyroidal, secondary pituitary, and tertiary hypothalamic congenital or acquired hypothyroidism. And for pituitary thyrotropin, it's also indicated for TSH suppression as well. And there's a few limitations of use And then the important thing here is the dosage administration. They tell you everything you need to know about the dose. So these are tablets. You should administer once daily, preferably on an empty stomach, 1/2 to 1 hour before breakfast, and administer at least 4 hours before or after drugs that are known to interfere with absorption. Then evaluate, there's a few other notes on here. And they also tell you the dosage forms and strengths. So there's different dosage forms. The tablets come in a range from 25 to 300 micrograms. MCG means microgram. So that's 1 × 10 to the -6th power of a gram, right? That is 1 microgram. The other thing they tell you is contraindications. Now, like indications that this drug is actually used for certain disease states, contraindications are things where you're not going to use this drug for. And in fact, if you try and use this drug for that particular disease, it will likely be ineffective and it won't work. So for uncorrected adrenal insufficiency, Synthroid is not recommended for use here. We then have several warnings and precautions, so these are important. So there's several cardiac adverse reactions in the elderly, myxedema coma. You probably want to know about that. That's probably important. Acute adrenal crisis in patients with concomitant adrenal insufficiency, worsening of diabetic control, so this is important for diabetic patients, and a decreased bone mineral density associated with thyroid hormone over replacement. So that may be important, especially in a patient with osteoporosis, for example. And then we have some adverse reactions. Now, adverse reactions can be these are essentially side effects that are associated with Synthroid therapy. So, they list several side effects right here: arrhythmias, myocardial infarction, dyspnea, muscle spasm, headache, nervousness, etc. And to report suspected, if you see something that's not on this list, or if you have questions, you can contact the manufacturer, AbbVie. They have an 800 number here, and the FDA also has an 800 number as well that you can contact. Then we have drug interactions. So now they don't really list these here because probably because there's just too many to list. These are interactions of this particular drug with that may interfere with the pharmacokinetics or metabolism of this of other chemicals, other drugs that may interfere with this one, and it could also be other food items as well, right? Specific food items or vitamins and minerals may also interfere with a particular drug. So for this, you're really going to have to kind of look more into the full information. And then they have use in specific populations. So, for example, pregnancy may require higher doses as well. So that's also important. And that's important for the healthcare provider to be aware of when prescribing this drug. And then the full prescribing information, this is where we have all these other pages. And generally in most of these in the PDF document, there's hyperlinks to all of the individual parts. So if you want to know full information about indications and usage, just go to the hyperlink, and this tells you everything about the full indications right there. And then you can also jump to you could jump to contraindications, and so they'll tell you there. Now they say it's contraindications with uncorrected adrenal insufficiency, and then C, warnings and precautions. And so that's under 5.4. So then we can jump down to 5.4, and this tells you full information about acute adrenal crisis in patients with concomitant adrenal insufficiency. And so thyroid hormone increases metabolic clearance of glucocorticoids, initiation of thyroid hormone therapy prior to initiating glucocorticoid therapy may precipitate an acute adrenal crisis in these patients. So that's important there. And so then if we kind of go more warnings and precautions, this tells you really all the information under warnings and precautions right there. And then the adverse reactions, this tells you more specific details of specific systems that are involved in each of these side effects down here as well too. So that's important. Then when we get to drug interactions, we didn't really have too many drug interactions listed before, so now they're here. And so, 7.1, many drugs can exert effects on thyroid hormone pharmacokinetics and metabolism and may alter the therapeutic response to Synthroid. And table 5 has many of these chemicals right here, like phosphate binders. Now some of them are drugs, but calcium carbonate, that's a fairly common salt right there. Ferrous sulfate, sevelamer, lanthanum. Orlistat is a drug that may interfere bile acid sequestrants, ion exchange resins, protein pump inhibitors may interfere, sucralfate, and antacids. These are over-the-counter, like aluminum and magnesium hydroxides. And so you want to be careful and monitor patients that are also taking some of these drugs to make sure they're getting an effective dose right there. And then they have another table with more drugs that may interfere. Now, the first one may decrease T4 absorption. Now, table 6 is drugs that may alter T4 triiodothyronine, T3 serum transport. So this is slightly different effect, but these drugs may also affect this as well. So clofebrate, estrogens. If you have someone that's got an opiate addiction, that might be noted here because heroin and methadone are on this list. Tamoxifen, mitotane, androgens, asparaginase, salicylates, right? So these are aspirin-related medications. Carbamazine, furosemide, heparin, again, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. So those are things you're going to want to watch as well too. And then there's table 7. They have some drugs that may alter hepatic metabolism of T4. That's hypothyroidism, and phenobarbital and rifampin are on that list. And we have drugs that may decrease conversion of T4 to T3. And so beta-adrenergic agonists, glucocorticoids, and other drugs such as amiodarone. And so these are all things you're going to watch, because then you need to know, if you're a medical professional, you need to know all of the drugs that your patient is taking, so that, if they're taking one of these drugs that's on this list, you probably don't want to prescribe Synthroid for that patient. May look for an alternative in that case. And I think your pharmacist is going to be very useful in looking at this, because your pharmacist probably has a list of all the patients' drugs that have been prescribed, and then the computers, they use computers now to kind of pop that up, and if like 2 drugs pop up on the list that are incompatible, the computer will tell them about that. So that's very important, right? So that's the drug interactions, very important. And we have use in specific populations. We can kind of click to there and see what they say about pregnancy. And so pregnant women treated with oral levothyroxine to maintain euthyroid state have not reported increased rates of major birth defects, miscarriages, so that's good. There are risks to the mother and fetus associated with untreated hypothyroidism in pregnancy. And so this is due to TSH levels that may increase during pregnancy. So TSH should be monitored and Synthroid dosage adjusted during pregnancy. So you're going to want to monitor. They're not saying not to use it in this case, but you're going to want to monitor a pregnant patient very closely. Then lactation, again, pediatric use. So this is very important to take into account for those under 17 years of age, so for minors. And then also for the elderly as well. That's also important. Number 10 is what to do in the case of overdose, right? So, you know, if you have, these are the signs and symptoms of overdose. And so in addition, you might have, you might have hyperthyroidism, so an enlarged thyroid. And you might also have confusion and disorientation, cerebral embolism. This could be a very serious thing here. Shock, coma, and death have been reported. Actually, all of those I think would be pretty important. Seizures occurred in a 3-year-old child ingesting 3.6 milligrams of levothyroxine. So I'd definitely keep this away from children. Symptoms may not necessarily be evident until several days after ingestion. So that's also important to monitor even days after you suspect that a patient may have overdosed. Now then we get to the description. Now, as a healthcare professional, the chemical information, you know, they have the chemical structure here, and they contain the chemical name right here. And so, you know, obviously most healthcare professionals will probably refer to this by their brand name, and some will also use the main levothyroxine sodium. Then every chemical also has a chemical name, and in this case that's L3, 3', 5, 5' tetraiodothyronine sodium salt. And so that's pretty complicated. Now, what does that all mean? Well, thyronine is the main drug, so that's probably the main compound. And then tetraiodo means we have 4 iodines at substituents on the ring. And the 3, 3', 5, and 5' tells you the substituent numbers of where they are on that ring, right? So that's just what that means. And so then they tell you synthetic T4 is chemically identical to that produced in the human thyroid gland. So it's basically the same thing. You're taking this as a supplement, right? And so this is the chemical formula here. Now you'll notice that the main drug has a chemical formula, but then we have a salt. So we have an ionic bond between the sodium and the carboxylic acid. That's the COO group right here. That COO is a carboxylic acid in base form. So these oxygens have a negative charge on them that's distributed, and the sodium has a positive charge. And then this is an aqueous solution, so there is water present in that chemical structure as well. The molecular weight is given, that's 798.86, so that may be important to take into account. That's important for things like bioavailability. Now the chemical structure, when you look at this, in my opinion, prescribing information doesn't really do a good job of showing the chemical structure, right? And if you really want the best structure, if you really want to see what this drug's going to look like, I would recommend going to PubChem. Just do a search for PubChem, and you're going to find, then you can do a search for any chemical compound. Levothyroxine sodium. Here it is right here, right? And it tells you parathyroid hormone-like hormone. So there's your levothyroxine sodium. Now this is the PubChem database of the National Library of Medicine. So this tells you all the chemical information you really want to know, and more so from you're going to get in the prescribing information. You get the structure, You get the primary hazards of that chemical, you get the molecular formula, synonyms, and you get, a basic description as well, right? And you can even, if you want to click on the laboratory chemical safety data sheet, you can click on that as well. And this tells you all you want to know about the health hazards right here. And they usually use these pictograms to indicate the different health hazards, right? And so, obviously the main hazard suspected of damaging fertility of the unborn child. That's why there's pregnancy things in the prescribing information, and can cause damage to organs through prolonged or repeated exposure. So those are important to take into account. And then, of course, under the description, it kind of tells you everything that it does, and what you have to do with the mechanism of action, for example, right? And under the structure, then you can get a really nice chemical structure, and they've kind of highlighted where the iodines are and the oxygen atoms. You can then look at the 3D structure. Now the 2D structure this is just in 2 dimensions right here, so it looks flat. But look at the 3D structure now, right? And if you look at the 3-dimensional structure, you'll see that this is certainly not a planar molecule, right? You'll see, and I think this is probably the same orientation roughly as in the prescribing information. So over here we see a phenol OH, so that's an OH connected to a phenyl ring. The big purple atoms are iodine atoms, so there's 4 of those. Anything that's in gray is a carbon atom. Anything that's in red is an oxygen atom. Anything that's white is hydrogen. Anything that's blue is a nitrogen atom, right? So we see 2 phenyl rings with the iodo substituent. This oxygen between the 2 phenyl rings is an ether oxygen. These are just methylene carbons. The nitrogen, that's an NH2. There's 2 hydrogens attached to it. That's an amine. And then this over here, this COOH, this is a carboxylic acid. Now, in solution, this hydrogen's not going to be here because this is going to be in base form based on its pH. So then sodium will bind here. But we're looking at the PubChem database, and they're going to show the full acid form of this drug. So they're going to show the carboxylic acid with the COOH, right? So that's the carboxylic acid. So that's kind of the PubChem database, and you can kind of see how that works. The other thing to kind of point out is after that is where the pharmacology information is. This is the very end of it. And so this tells you the mechanism of action. Thyroid hormones, because this is a thyroid hormone, exerts their physiologic actions through the control of DNA transcription and protein synthesis, and triiodothyronine and L-thyroxine diffuse into the cell nucleus and bind to the thyroid receptor proteins, to DNA, right? And then the pharmacodynamics. So this just tells you kind of what happens, the dynamic nature and the physiological effects once it gets into the body. And then the pharmacokinetics, these are the ADME properties. And ADME stands for absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion, right? So this tells you how the drug is absorbed into the body, how it's distributed to the system, how it's metabolized, and then how the body gets rid of it right here. And so you'll see where it's gotten rid of. And then they tell you a little bit about the toxicology and some long-term carcinogenicity that we also looked at in the PubChem database. And then they tell you a little bit about storage and handling, and they actually give you a full description of what all the tablets look like and all that. And so that's everything there, right? So that's kind of where to find stuff. Oh, there is one thing to mention under the chemistry. So why is this called L-thyroxine, right? Well, one of the things you'll notice here is these dashed lines right here, right? Now, most of the lines between the various substituent groups, these are solid lines. The dashed lines indicate that, see, this carbon right here bears an amine, a hydrogen, a carboxylic acid, and the rest of the drug. There's 4 different substituents. And anytime you have a carbon with 4 different substituents, that means you can have 2 different stereoisomers of that drug. And so all this stuff could be, it's connected to this carbon. The dashes mean that those dashes are going into the plane of the paper, right? If this was a little wedge, that would be a solid little triangle, like a wedge, that would mean that all this would be coming towards the viewer, be coming towards you, right? And so because it's going away from you, it's in the L form. That stands for levorotatory. And you know, and if it was in the D form, it would have a little wedge, and that would be dextrorotatory. And what that refers to is when you have a chiral compound, it refers to the compound's ability to rotate plane polarized light, because those 2 drugs basically have the same physical properties in solution. They're really, you know, structurally you can't distinguish them other than this little characteristic here, and physical properties, they rotate plane polarized light in the opposite direction, hence the D and the L form. And what's important about chiral compounds like this is only the L form has biological activity. The D form is an inactive drug. It doesn't do anything for you. So it's very important to be able to distinguish between the D and the L form stereochemically. So that's a very important distinction to take into account. So that's important in this case. And you're going to see, if you look at the prescribing information for a lot of drugs, you're going to see a lot of chirality because the structure of a drug impacts how that drug binds to the receptor. And it's got to bind a certain way in order for it to have a particular effect. It's kind of like a lock and a key, except in this case, it's really, the lock is flexible, and the drug, the key, is flexible as well. It's more of what we call that, we call that induced fit. And so it's very important to still have the right shape, because if you've got something bound in the opposite direction, then it's kind of like having a key that doesn't fit your lock, right? So that's not going to work for you. So you have to have the right drug, the right key to open the right pathway, right? All right, so I hope you've learned something about reading these drug inserts and prescribing information. And so I hope you found this useful. If you have any comments, please leave those in the comments down below on this video. I read those, and so I'm happy to answer any other questions that you might have. And if you like this video, go ahead and hit the like button on here. Go ahead and subscribe and hit the little bell icon as well, so you're notified if you like the content that you see on these videos. And then I can, you know, that certainly helps me know what you like and know what kind of videos to produce again. So in the meantime, I will see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.